Hey, good morning. Don't go, sit down. Come forecast the future with us.
To give people like a...
All right, I'm gonna give you a 2-second warning. I am not Laura Walker, as you may already have guessed, contrary to what it says in your programs. My name is Christina Norman, and I'm the interim head of WNYC Studios, and we have assembled a powerhouse panel of women here to talk about the future of the industry. There's been so much change lately, and these women are all on the forefront of figuring out what's next and figuring out how to respond and to create the next big thing. So I will jump right into introductions. To my right is Christy Gressman. Christy is a partner in the Vale Presents podcast network, alongside Joseph Fink and Jerry Craner, co-founders of the network and co-creators of the genre-defining fiction podcast, Welcome to Vale. Her work focuses on managing and growing Vale Presents, navigating the ever-evolving podcast industry landscape at the helm of an independent network, as well as developing and producing the network shows. Next up, we have, sorry you guys, different order. A Work It alum, Kerri Hoffman is the CEO of PRX and PRI, a leading public media company focused on content, talent, and technology. And then last, I'm gonna get to these fast. These people have amazing bios. Please read them, but I wanna get right to this discussion as soon as we can. We have Erika Dilday, who's the executive director of Futuro Media. Futuro is an independent, nonprofit, multimedia content creator producing journalism that's designed to educate and enlighten. And Erika has been tasked with shaping and guiding Futuro Media's strategic vision and long-term sustainability. All right, I want to dive right into questions and talk about what is going on in this podcast landscape. We had a really interesting year already with lots and lots of change, and I'd love to hear from the panel and have them share with you what to make of all of this. We've seen changes at Audible, Panoply, BuzzFeed, the merger between PRI and PRX. Where's the industry going, and what do we make of this? Christy?
Oh, wow. So I'll tell you where the industry's going in its entirety right now. No, something that is probably pretty obvious to all of us, and I'm sure we'll all have a take on that, is there are a lot of challenges we're facing right now. And I think the headline to me is that things are rapidly changing. I don't know what the rules are anymore, because the things that I thought were the rules a year ago or 6 months or 3 months ago are now different. And so we're here on a panel talking about forecasting the future, and we're people who are really plugged into what's happening in this industry and trying to do that. And even we are sometimes finding ourselves just having to react and adapt and adjust. And to me, I think the silver lining of all of that is there's so much opportunity there. And we can probably come back to that later, but we have an opportunity here to make our own rules in this period of rapid evolution and change, but it's felt rocky.
Carrie, you've been on the front row in making a lot of this change happen. What are you seeing?
I think the future is female.
There you go. That's clear.
I have been to all the work-its, and the first one had 75 people, so this is kind of inspiring and amazing. And so I think one of the most important things to remember about podcasting is it actually isn't very mature or very old as an industry. Even though it's been around for a while, for many years it was mostly a technologist game. And so where I put the marker is about 4 years ago. And so if you just think about 4 years, what's happened, there's an enormous amount of disruption, there's a lot of technology action, there's conferences like this happening, there's conferences like the podcast movement, which has 2,500 people going to it. It's hugely disruptive. So what I like to think about, I worry a lot about the money part of it, how people continue to make impactful content, and that is a lot about revenue. And so the piece that is most inspiring to me is that we actually have to be able to ask many more questions. So I am on a lot of panels where the future is kind of what's on the topic. This is unusual to have it all be all women, but there's often a lot of hubris about what the crystal ball is going to say, and I kind of discard all of that and say, what are the questions we need to be asking, what are the experiments we need to be doing, and who are the people we need to strategically work with to advance the mission forward.
So keep calm and podcast on.
Exactly.
Okay. And Erika, you are at the forefront of creating something that's new. So talk a little bit about where Futuro is and where do you see the opportunities that didn't exist potentially before?
Sure, and one thing I will say is there has been this crazy expansion. I mean, everybody's making a podcast in their basement right now, which I actually think is good for the industry because there will eventually be a contraction. But what there has been room for, and also what we at Futuro are really excited about, is the opportunity to bring in different, diverse, engaging voices. This is a time in podcasting where people will listen to people and voices and ideas that they hadn't listened to before, and I think it's the most exciting time. And when the contraction, which will happens, I think it will leave us with a much richer field.
I just want to point out, if you can't see them, that Erika is wearing earrings that have prints on them. So that is sort of the best thing that's happened to me this morning. Let's talk about monetization. I've read, of course, and maybe you have as well, that the market size for podcasting in 2017 was $313 million, which is a lot of money, but it's a pittance compared to what is spent on a lot of other platforms. In order for these diverse voices to continue to have the platform and the reach, we need to convince advertisers and sponsors that this is the medium they need to be a part of. What success have you seen, and what's standing in the way of some of that moving forward?
So we were just talking about this. I think there is a real opportunity here to convince new brands to enter the space. We've been seeing new brands realize that these are the audiences you want to reach. Podcast listeners are excellent people to advertise to. Just speaking of one piece of monetization, we think at Night Vale Presents, we think of monetization in terms of sponsorship, but we also think of it more holistically. But yeah, I think one thing is reaching new brands, and then remind me of the next part of your question.
That could be good for now. Do you
Sure.
want to, Kerri, do you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very rare that we have to explain what podcast is anymore to a sponsor, so that's a sign of progress. But in some ways, that $311 million represents the ad revenue. There's about $600 million that represents venture money being pumped into audio companies. Mm-hmm. And so when you have something that's out of balance, well, that becomes an industry that is under a lot of pressure to be a hit-making industry. Yeah. And that actually is, I think, one of the biggest risks to creativity and kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that's needed and can flourish in podcasting. I really think that we almost need let 1,000 flowers bloom. And in order to do that, we actually have to democratize the way that podcasting is also funded, and be careful, because those paywalls, like I said, this industry is only about 4 years old, and so when we start putting friction in the way of a maker and their audience, it will create a real stall effect of opening it up to diverse voices, without a doubt. And so I think that the infrastructure around the financing is important. And I thought that Radiolab presentation was excellent. I'm not a producer, but I love thinking about workflows and stuff, so I found the whole thing very interesting. But I would venture to guess there's not a lot of people in this room that have 7 months to make a single episode and then expect to get a return on that. So in a disaggregated media environment, which is what podcasting is, how do we bring enough money into the experiments and into the individuals that are doing impactful content and help them do it in a way that's efficient, so that, we need Radiolab and This American Life and others to present us with the inspiration of what can happen on a big scale, and then we need to replicate that on little scale so that those seeds keep getting planted.
So Erika, again, speaking to, as you said, diverse voices, making sure that there's a lot more room at the table for people. Is there some barriers to that in reaching the right kind of monetization?
I think so, and I want to build on what Kerri said, because I feel that point can't be emphasized enough, which is that there is the creativity side of podcasting and there is the money side of podcasting. And I think venture capital is the best and worst thing to happen to the podcasting field, because there is this idea that there's money out there for podcasting, but there's also idea that it is strictly focused on ROI and how quickly you can turn this idea around into something that's profitable for the investor. And when that is your main goal, you're not going to make the best work. You're not going to create the best content. And so one of the things that I love to tell people is go slow. Just because someone's going to hand you a pile of money, and they may do it, doesn't mean you should take it, which is hard to believe. But it is important that you have your idea, you have your creative vision, and that you follow that as opposed to just trying to make something that'll get you some cash.
Go ahead, Christy.
Just to react to that, so our strategy at Night Vale Presents as an independent network has been absolutely not to take venture capital. So that has directly led to us having to constantly think about how to make this value proposition to sponsors, how to monetize shows otherwise, how to engage with audiences, and how to do all of that as a network that is one fiction focused. So that means that our production time is usually longer, our production costs are usually higher. We're not necessarily doing shows that can be produced and released in quick succession year-round. And so I can talk about this a little bit later, but we've been thinking about ways to innovate, ways to engage with broader audiences, ways to monetize in new ways. And it is a challenging space right now if your strategy is not to take those capital dollars. And as Kerri was saying, it's really lopsided right now because we're not seeing the sponsorship piece of it match that venture capital. So what's going to make up that difference for people who are expecting a return on their investment? We're not sure yet. There's a lot of evolution to happen.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being blinded as well by the sun, so it's just like, one of the things that's interesting to me that I spend a lot of time thinking about is data. And you talk about the value proposition for sponsors, for partners, for other kinds of folks. Where does data play into this, and how do we know enough to be able to make a compelling case? Because I think that we all, from the anecdotal things we know of our audiences, they're engaged, they're active, they're deeply connected, they do all the things that advertisers would want, but yet there still seems to be a bit of a disconnect.
I mean, I think a lot about data, and I think one thing is to, if you're an independent producer, it is really important that you understand the data that represents your show and that you understand it in the context that is similar to how other people are talking about their show, so that there's some standardization. There's a lot of unevenness around there, even the simple common mistake where people refer to downloads as listeners. Those are not the same thing. So just the simple thing of understanding your basic metrics, being very fluent in those and being very confident in them and confident in what your goals are. But advertisers won't come into podcasting unless the data is sophisticated enough to prove that it is worthy of their significant investment, especially when it moves out of that coupon code type of advertiser. So data is actually an essential part of our future, and everyone who, the thing is, this is just the way that it'll always be, which is that content and technology are really forever intertwined, and curation is happening by technologists, et cetera, and so data is just the currency at which that conversation can happen.
Yeah, Erika?
One thing I would say, too, is also collect your own data. I mean, the great thing about having everything electronically is it's not ridiculously difficult to do surveys, to ask for listener feedback, and being able to have data that you yourself have collected that you can show to an advertiser that gets to the questions that you want to be able to answer, I think is immeasurable. There will always be analytics that are out there because they're out there, but having your own data set is extremely important, I think, to showing your value to sponsors.
Chris, go ahead, Carrie.
Can I just comment on that? Because I actually think that's an excellent point, that when we say data, usually people think immediately that metrics and numbers. But what Erika just said is really important, because there's a softer side of telling the story of your show, and small shows can be very successful based on that story. And so figure out the way and the information that speaks to the impact and the community that you represent and can speak to, because it may be very unique, and there are always people who are interested in partnering with you on that.
Yeah, Christy, I think you've done that really well with the Night Vale catalog.
Yeah, thank you. Just to react to that, we have shows that are larger and we have shows that are smaller, and something that I am always trying to do is collect that soft data on those smaller shows especially, so I can really tell the story of the show and why it's valuable and why that audience is valuable. And if you're a sponsor, even a non-traditional sponsor that maybe is just testing out the podcasting space, why you want to reach that very audience. And it may not be the very biggest one, but it might be the most engaged one. Just to give you one example, we have a show on our network called Within the Wires, and people love those ad reads that the creator Jeffrey Craner does so much that on our Patreon for the show, and Patreon is another way that we engage with audiences and do some fundraising, we have a reward tier that is just the ads without the episodes, rather than episodes without ads, because they're so funny. And that's something special. Like that is proven love of an advertisement, that we can show a brand, and that is one piece of making that value proposition. And another thing that I think is just really encouraging, speaking of also the hard data and the broader topic, as this technology improves, as data in this space improves, I think a wonderful thing is we are learning really good things. Like all of the good optimistic things we think about this industry and the things we think about the audience, many of those are being proven true. It's so early, we have to keep evolving to get more hard numbers to back that up. But the trends are good.
I want to get back to Kerri, where you started, which is it's still really early days. Yeah. And that is something I think that we all have to keep reminding ourselves, but it's also an opportunity for incredible innovation. And all of you are leading in that way as well. So I'd love to hear some things that you're looking forward to and some changes that you're sort of implementing, especially as you bring two entities together.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, like, Christy just gave us a great example of just an experiment of a reward tier. I'm sure that took some time to figure out, and if it didn't work, you would have pulled it and done something else. And so it is a time for a lot of experiments. One of the investments that we're making as an organization is in training, and that training allows us to kind of round out what we see that are gaps in the independent producer path, I guess you'd call it, which is craft is one thing, and it's an important thing. It's essentially you have to have an excellent asset that you have as your show, and you have to know a lot about technology and a lot about how money works, and there's a lot of change and innovation happening in that space, and so we not only are innovating in that space, but we're trying to teach as we do so, because it's so important that people have a round set of skills to be successful. The ramp to success in podcasting is still very, very high. If you're not attached to a network, you're really on your own. And so what are the things, these are the questions that we ask every day, which what are the things that we can do that shorten that ramp and also make it a smoother path so that people can be successful and they can partner in ways that they want to partner and they can tell the stories that they want to tell. But we make a lot of technology, so a lot of the work we're doing is in smoothing out the friction, is what it boils down to, between a maker and their audience. And that's technology around publishing, it's technology around third-party platforms, it's technology for distribution, and it is also technology around serving up ads in a way that is intuitive and easy. So whether you're an individual, I can see Megan Tan right there, and I often say, whether you're Megan Tan or Ira Glass, you actually still need access to technology, because that's the way that everybody's going to be successful.
Erika, your background includes documentary film and stints at the New York Times and Nat Geo, CBS. So I think you've seen a lot of change in a lot of different industries. How are you bringing some of those skills to advancing what it is that you're building with Futuro?
Well, actually, one of the programs that I am most proud of right now that we're doing with PRX is a community podcast lab, which is something that had developed as a video project when I was at Maisels Documentary Center. But the idea of this project is we are finding people who normally don't see themselves in public media and bringing them in to tell their own stories. The idea is that stories of a neighborhood, of an ethnicity, of a group are normally told by reporters who come in for a little bit, then jump back out. And with the help of PRX at the Podcast Garage, we are running a program which turned out to be all women, by the way. We didn't plan for it to be that way. but is telling really diverse stories from people who normally otherwise would never have their voices heard, wouldn't see themselves, and creating those opportunities, I think, are where both the future of storytelling and podcasting lies, and we're committed to doing that, not just in Boston, but hopefully, we will partner on doing it in other cities as well.
Great. Christy, we were talking a little bit about some of the things that Night Vale's doing in terms of just innovating and really just trying every trick in the book.
Yeah, as Kerri said, we do experiment a lot, and that's a fun thing to do. We have the freedom to do that. That's how our network is set up. I can tell you a few things that we've been experimenting with. One is multi-platform storytelling. So the idea that when we're thinking about making a podcast, of course we are podcast first. We are dedicated to this industry and the artistry of it, and all the medium can be, but we focus on live touring. We've done some of the biggest live podcast tours in the world over the past few years. We also think about other releases that can be tied in other mediums to the podcast. So I produced a show last year that in partnership with Merge Records, and so we had a digital single release with every episode release, and then a vinyl album release at the end of the season, and we're going to do that again for our season 2. We're certainly thinking about film and TV projects, as many of us are, thinking about literary tie-ins, releasing script books in addition to original novels. And one of the things we do is we work with people who are actually coming from different artistic mediums, so coming into the space from music or from theater or from literature, and so we're allowing them to express the stories that they have in them across multiple platforms. So that's one thing. Another thing is about how do we engage and reach the audiences we already have in this space. So an example that we were talking about is we have the show Welcome to Night Vale, and that is our network's flagship show. So recently we started a talk show called Good Morning Night Vale, which is like an after show, recap show that is going through every episode of Welcome to Night Vale one by one and recapping with like guests from the show. And so that's really drawing from that recap tradition, and we've been having a lot of fun with that show so far. Another thing we're experimenting with is distribution models. So the thing I mentioned earlier with Patreon and reward tiers, and we really customize that show by show. So we have individual Patreons for the shows that need them and want them. And we think about those tiers really carefully and pay a lot of attention to it. And that can be a money-making tool, but it can also just be an audience development tool that's really rewarding for both sides, I think.
So it seems like there's a try anything, be open to any idea. Kerri, you were going to say something?
I was, because I love it when I get this rundown from you, which I don't always get in one sitting, because what the thing that you're underscoring is to pivot a lot, experiment a lot, don't be afraid of stumbles, get back up. It's a story of resiliency and rebound, and that's kind of exactly what everybody needs to be. That's a space that you need to be in. And it was underscored by the Radiolab example, just by the way that they described all of the iterations. That's another version of it in a single story, but that's kind of what we have to do as a network as well. I like the idea of looking at the spaces that are around us, like music, like with the Merge Records thing. We're doing an experiment this spring. We were contacted by the Met to do a choreography of the songs, the original music that's in the podcast Ear Hustle. And that's a really fun, different expression that's acted out for a show that has touched a lot of people. So it's just, we're just trying to think out of the box for all those things.
That's cool. I didn't know you were doing that.
Yes.
I'm working on something with the New York Public Library, the Performing Arts Library, too.
Oh, good.
We'll
compare
similar
notes.
kind of, yeah.
So if you want a partnership, this is the place to come to. It's all happening right here.
We come here to catch up.
So incredibly optimistic about the future, it sounds like, right? But
Absolutely.
But what
Absolutely.
keeps you up at night?
The consolidation of big players and the paywalls that limit the growth of an industry in its infant stages.
Erika?
Independent funding, knowing that we will be able to create the content that we know is valuable and should be out there, and have the ability to pull in funding to do that without too many restrictions.
Yeah, I'll echo that funding because we're seeing a lot of people come into the space with a lot of money, and as we were saying earlier, there's this lopsided situation that's happening where we really need to develop the financial model of the space itself from within. And so I'm worried about that lopsidedness. That it's sort of too rapid. We need more evolution time ourselves to really meet that.
And it's also destroying, I think, a lot of good ideas and good projects where if they don't immediately show a return, then they're dropped, and people can't continue them.
Yeah, but I think to your point, like this happens, or Kerri's point, there's a shakeout, and then there's a reset.
Yes.
And I do think that, with people like you at the helm of these great organizations, podcasting will continue to grow and thrive and iterate and stay low to the ground and nimble. So,
well, one of the things that, Erika really identified this too, is that the way that you keep the creativity high and the investment high is we have to close the skills gap. And so that's why, like the funding that CBB has provided to podcasts, as Pat said, over $3 million, the money that goes to closing that skills gap is how podcasting will not only have stronger roots, but it will also be how women, people of color, are able to succeed in it.
Yeah,
close it.
Yeah. Just to close on a really good note for me, I'm so optimistic in the end because we're talking about a lot of challenges. We're talking about the need to evolve. We're still at this early place where there's room to make the rules. Like we in this room can make those rules and shape them in the ways that we think work for us. And that's an incredible opportunity. How exciting is that?
I think that's right. Well said.
awesome. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Christy, Kerri, and Erika, thank you.